and you will notice that the space next to me is vacant. Normally, my lovely wife Polly would be sitting there. However, I just need to mention that perhaps right around 9 o'clock this morning, we had grandchild number 5, and that would actually be one of Polly's girls, had little Ezra David Goodman. And so he is resting and eating well and all those things. And Polly is on the way to deliver cheeseburgers because cheeseburgers are a necessary nutrient. But in the meantime, welcome to our Tuesday night class. We continue to do our stuff, but I wanted you guys to know why the seat next to me is so obviously vacant, because of great news. So that's what we're doing tonight. Glad to have you with us as always, and I will be solo driving the captions and chat as well. So come on and say hello if you're with us, and just let me know that you're out there. And I'm about to take that caption away that says join our virtual community. And I want to mention real quickly a couple things. We are in this series right now about cultivating culture. And as we've said all along, we're really trying to give some contribution to a culture where there's so much chaos going on, and where there's a need for some level of intentionality about cultivating emotional health and relational health and just social health. And so that series that we're doing is also going to lead us to a couple of events in October. So in a couple minutes after I say hello to everybody, I'm going to tell you about the events coming up in October. While I'm doing that, if you're watching on YouTube, go down and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm supposed to point it down, but I don't know where it is. And, click on the thing to get notifications, blah, 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 blah. All the things that will let you let YouTube know that you're there watching us. So let me say hello to everybody and say hello to Abby. Yes, cheeseburger deliveries are the best. Yes, Mandy, the baby is here, happy, healthy, and apparently eating well. Beth, there you are. Welcome from Australia. Demetria, super good to have you with us. Trey, nice to see you, sir. Betty, once again, several of you guys joined us on Saturday when we did our live on the Think Differently Academy. We're really going to start making an attempt to get onto the Think Differently Academy feed live several times throughout the month to visit with people and get to know some of the people that are there, but perhaps not on Facebook or even on our YouTube channel. So Betty, it was good to talk with you on Saturday last week. Nancy, good to see you. And then Susan and Barbara, and Bethany, baby Ezra and burgers. Yeah, it's not a bad combination, right? So good to have you guys with us tonight. I want to just go back, like I said, and mention that we're in the midst of the part of our series on cultivating culture, where we talk about the importance of really not just creating emotional health, but intentionally fostering emotional health in all of the areas that we live and move and have our being. I just realized that I'm sitting between two chairs, and it's evident by the video, but I knew that, but I just didn't realize it would show on the video. So because we're on the particular part of the series where we talk about emotional health, I want to point out that we've got a couple of things coming up in October. So I'm going to put that up down there so that you can take a look at that and hopefully then come along and check out our events page. Coming up in October, we've got 2 virtual events that we're offering. One of them, 2 different formats, but 2 different virtual events, both of them on essentially emotional health. One of them called Outsmart Your Heart, which is really about developing emotional intelligence, a topic that we regularly urge our clients to find resources on. And they always say, what resources? And I was like, we should do our own resource. So not only will we be doing that live event, but that live event will then also be an opportunity for people later to look at the content as a member of Think Differently Academy. The difference with the event is that event is going to be 4 weeks long, where you watch the content during the week, and then on Tuesday nights during those 4 weeks, you'll jump on with Polly and I to make personal application, ask questions about, figure out what the things you've been learning about on video may have to do with your own personal journey in life. Outsmart Your Heart, Developing Emotional Intelligence. We just finished shooting the video for that this weekend, and we're pretty excited about the content that we put out there. But you guys won't see that until you sign up for Outsmart Your Heart, which is October 19th through November 9th. And again, you go to the events page as put on the screen in front of you, and they'll tell you both the dates of that event, and then they'll tell you about the other event, which is healing the heart that keeps you hooked. A lot of times people don't know that if you're trying to change a habit, break a habit, start a new commitment in your life, sometimes the greatest either strength or obstacle to keep you either bound or free is understanding the emotions connected to those habits and or behaviors. And so in particular, we want to talk about compulsivity, otherwise known as addiction or addictive tendencies, and the emotions that are connected to that. So, healing the heart that keeps you hooked is more targeted on specifically the kind of emotional issues that drive compulsive or habitual behavior. So, things like weight loss, self destructive habits, um, thoughts that you have a hard time stopping, those kind of things that seem to be a constant plague in your life. We'll take a look at not only what are the emotional components behind that, but what to do about those emotions so that you can, as we say, heal the heart that keeps you hooked. So those are the two events coming up. I'm once again going to click off that. So get that. That's at tdacad.com/events/. And you can go to that page to get all the data. More importantly, you can go to that page to register for those events. So let me jump back over to chat, see who I'm missing. So April's with us. Hey, April, how are you? Good to see you. And Jim and Annette and Beth, of course, still with us. Well, get cheeseburgers delivered. Actually, Polly's doing the delivery on that. So we can get cheeseburgers delivered, however, because there's such a thing as DoorDash. Is that what it's called? Or Uber Eats, and all those different sources that that will deliver food to our doorway here. So Latham, good to see you. Melanie, good to see you. I haven't seen you for a little bit, but I'm always glad when you jump on. And then Rose, we met you Saturday also, or we got to see you again Saturday, I should say. So Grubhub, yes, thanks. There's all these different. So sorry, Beth, but yes, we can get cheeseburgers and just about anything else delivered directly to our door. I understand that during lockdown times, that's an incredibly helpful service. We just either cook or go get food. So that's a lot of talking. I'm 7.5 minutes in, and all I've done is introduce stuff. So I want to talk about tonight's topic, and that is creating emotional safety. What is emotional safety? Why does it matter so much? What can we do in our both personal experience as well as in our relationships to create emotional safety? What are some of the benefits in it, and why is it so important? Let me tell you why this is on my mind. If you follow me on Twitter at Bob Hamp, that's a good way to kind of get behind my thought process and know what's on my mind at any given point. Last night, I tweeted out something about our children, and by our children, I don't mean mine and Polly's. Our children, I mean the children here in the United States, and really, I think around the world, um, are at an incredibly fragile time right now, as noted by the suicide rate or self-harm rate in children 8 to 12, and just the incredible increase in that over the last year and a half to 24 months. In particular, I think the lockdown, and I'm just going to say, I think the emotional atmosphere of our culture is something, part of what I said in that tweet last night is that children are like sponges for what's floating around in the emotional atmosphere. And when we don't handle our conflict, when we don't handle our pain, or when we don't handle our anger well, then children tend to absorb that into their being. And they're not equipped or sophisticated enough to know what to do with that. And so I think there's been an escalation in self-harm and suicide in younger children as we as a nation have really escalated our rage, escalated our unresolved conflict, escalated the ways that we confront each other in public ways without resolution. And all those things come together to just say, I think we're at a time where if we don't begin to understand what it means to create emotional safety and how to do that, we will continue to see our children and our own mental health at risk. So, to define what I mean by emotional safety, I think I need to take a deep breath. I get on these things, I'm like, I have so much I need to say, I need to keep rolling. And then I forget that I need to stop and be connected. So take a deep breath. Usually that's Polly's thing. She says, Bob, take a deep breath. We got word last night again of someone else that one of our good friends had a good friend whose 12-year-old committed suicide last night. And it frustrates me to no end the ways that we foster a rage-filled culture and a pain-generating culture, and then wonder why it is that our children seem to be the ones who bear and express that pain in these kind of ways. And so when I talk about emotional safety, I want to back up and talk a little bit about the event called Outsmart Your Heart, but more importantly, the content from that event. One of the things we'll talk about that event is the purpose of emotions. In other words, emotions exist for a reason. Often emotions take a great deal of heat because people feel that, your emotions will lie to you, your emotions will, deceive you. Don't let your emotions drive you. Here's the thing you need to know. The two important functions of emotions that we talk about that event. Number one, emotions are an internal communication process. Emotions tell us on the inside what we perceive about the world on the outside. Oh, hey Pam, good to see you. Um, and when we talk about emotions, we're really talking about the internal experience that we have as connected to the external world around us. But second, and even more important, emotions function to drive us. Now, I go into detail about that in the event itself, where we teach those two functions of emotions. But what I want you to catch tonight is that when a person doesn't have the sophistication to recognize and know how to respond to the intensity of emotions when the external and internal communication is going on, the driving force of emotions pushes them to a place where they can feel overwhelmed. That being the case, creating emotional safety is really about helping the people in our atmosphere, in our circle, be at a place where they can be fully themselves and fully express what they're experiencing in a given moment, and know that they'll be completely received, valued, and validated in your atmosphere, in your orbit, if they both experience and express the things that they're feeling, that are true about them in that moment. Emotional safety. Let me give you the opposite. If you've ever been in a setting, sorry, my eyes really itch tonight. If you've ever been in a setting where you just know that if you were to speak up, you would face criticism, or you would face judgment, or even mocking or derision. If you've been in a setting like that, then you know the opposite of emotional safety. Now, the degrees to which the lack of emotional safety goes, obviously there's, the whole degrees of abuse all the way through the ranges of physical abuse. But just below kind of the area of emotional abuse, but still not necessarily safe, is this idea that in an atmosphere where if you were to be yourself, express yourself, or express your experience in that atmosphere, but or sense that you would face criticism, an intensification of other people's negative emotions towards you, or not just criticism, but mocking and or derision of some sort. That's what it means to lack emotional safety. Is that it's not safe to stand up for being you or expressing you in a given setting. Obviously, the more vulnerable the population, i.e., children, the more vulnerable the population, the less we can and should expect them to know that they can stand up for themselves, even in risky situations. But even as adults, we recognize that there's just certain settings where if I speak up right now, I'm going to face some kind of heat from somebody or even from everybody in this atmosphere. I've been in a number of meetings where sometimes my opinion was so different from what I believe the majority of the people in those meetings was. I knew that if I spoke up, I was going to get kind of the heads turning and kind of the look or the words of either scorn, contempt, or kind of being made fun of. Eliza, you're with us too. Man, we've got lots of our friends visiting with us tonight. So good to see you. Um, so in a setting like that where I'm in a meeting and I know that if I speak freely what's on my mind, and I'm going to face some resistance for that, I have to kind of decide in my soul, Is it worth speaking up? Is the issue that we're discussing, in my opinion, of important enough both to me and I think to the room? And then there's Margie. Hey, you guys, man, we do have a lot of our friends out there. I'm super glad to see you guys, and thanks for letting me know that you're there. In that setting, I have to decide, is what I'm talking about worth it enough? And is my contribution to that meeting worth it enough that I'm willing to face whatever pressure comes back at me? Now, that's, we're talking about either a business meeting or a planning meeting in a religious organization or things like that. But still, when we speak up, we have to recognize that pushback is coming. More than pushback, and here's what I really want to hit on. Let me say it this way. One of the things I've learned from Polly is, if you're familiar with something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which talks about how our safety needs are first, and then our acceptance needs, and then our aesthetic needs, those kind of things, where if those needs aren't met, then none of our other needs can be met. So if our most basic need, that of safety, isn't met, then we can't meet the basic need of acceptance. If we can't meet the basic need of acceptance, and so on and so forth. So in talking about that, we've got to understand that both safety and acceptance are incredibly powerful tools to get people to either comply or not speak up. Not feeling safe physically, or not feeling like you'll be accepted, or another way to say that is feeling like you'll be rejected, is a very powerful tool to keep people silenced, and not just silenced, but to get people to retreat inside. I'm a family therapist. What that means is that not only do I do individual counseling and marriage counseling, but sometimes I sit down with families. And one of the things that I note in families where there's an abusive person is that the children feel incredibly unsafe emotionally. Now, does that mean that they fear that they'll be hit? Does that mean that they fear that they'll be physically harmed in some way? Not necessarily. But don't make a mistake to think that just because physical harm may not be imminent, that emotional harm is less of a threat. Specifically, what I want you to hear is that if they're afraid that they'll be rejected by a parent or rejected by a powerful person in their life, then that's as much a force to control responses, or to get a child, I'm going to say it this way, to turn inward and not only not express themselves verbally, but then to not trust themselves to be themselves in a given setting or relationship. So let me take a look and see what Bethan's saying. Emotional safety to me looks like people glad to be with me no matter what. They can walk with me in any emotion without trying to fix or feel insecure. They're just with me and it's okay. Yeah, goes both ways. And that idea of emotional safety says I can be completely myself. So the flip side of that is when you're not emotionally safe, you begin to feel like being yourself is not just unsafe, but would not be accepted. In my parable of the acrobat, I don't have a copy of that first book around here, but in my book, Think Differently, Live Differently, I use a parable, the parable of the acrobat, which some of you will know. It's also part of our Foundations of Freedom series. There's a moment in there where we talk about this child who was born to be a great acrobat, lost and found by farmers. When his mother and father, or the farmer and the farmer's wife that are raising him, there comes a point where he says, just to be myself means that my parents don't accept me. That's a definition of lacking emotional safety. But I want to take it a little bit further. I think in today's culture, there's an overall sense that we're not safe anyway. And a lot of us will be, if we question whether or not we're emotionally safe, one of the things that we'll do is we'll test the waters, right? We'll test the waters enough to say, what if I stick a little bit of myself out there? What if I express a little bit of what I'm feeling or thinking and see what comes back at me? Here's what happens if I test the waters and what comes back at me is either rejection, criticism, mocking, those kind of things, then I'm going to silence myself. But not only will I silence my words, I'll actually retreat inwardly and will increasingly mistrust the world around me. Not just the people in front of me, but increasingly mistrust the world around me. So what happens if a child let's say, is in a distressed state and starts to cry. Whether they're testing on purpose or not, they're about to find out whether their emotions will be received and accepted. And if one or both, well, say parents, if someone in the room shames them for their tears or criticizes them for their tears, then what's going to happen is their tears will turn inward and they won't express them again. But here's the dilemma: that doesn't make the pain go away. It simply makes their expression of pain lessened. So here's what you see in a child or people growing up or living in a place that's emotionally unsafe. Their internal sense of pain increases, but their trust of their ability to express it decreases. And so what's happening is they're building up the pressure of fear, anxiety, shame, guilt, and yet they don't feel that it's safe to talk about it with anyone. And so when that's happening, even when the pain is coming from another source besides home, but they don't feel safe at home, then that pain starts to internalize, and we see children begin to participate in or begin to express self-destructive behavior, or even to the point of taking their own lives. Let me see. Nancy's asked a question: how would you approach a situation where a co-parent's not emotionally safe for a child? I'm the safe parent, but I have no idea how to help her other than continuing to create a safe space. Nancy, that's a super important question. I'm glad you asked that. Let me just describe one of the dilemmas is when you're in a co-parenting situation with an ex-spouse, and that ex-spouse is not a safe person. You have to be careful that you don't criticize that person to your child, because then that creates a lack of safety in your home. If you're criticizing the other parent, even when the criticisms are valid, that child is looking to you to say, am I safe in your presence? And criticizing my other parent makes me feel unsafe. And so it's important, and here's my answer to your question, is, Nancy, it's important to be able to equip our children to know how to respond when emotions are being handled or not handled, to how to recognize safety or the lack of safety, and give them tools and strategies for what to do. And the way that I would do that is I would say, listen, as the male, I would say, as your dad, I would never expect you to be the one who's responsible to comfort me when I'm emotionally upset. So your mom or I, neither one of you should expect you to be the one who comforts us. We're the adults, you're the child. So just know that I would never put that on you, and hopefully your mother would also never put that on you. Now, I haven't criticized the other parent. I've simply said, this is what adults do, and this is what they don't expect from their children. And then I would want to go ahead and, to whatever degree, equip them. So if I were to put my emotional weight on you, if I were to start to expect you to comfort me when I'm upset or something like that, I want you to know that you can tell me that that's not your responsibility. And as much as you care about me, it's not your place to comfort me. Now, if they're in a situation where the other parent is unsafe, they're obviously not going to say that to the other parent directly. But what they can do is they can begin to learn how to manage that internally. When I'm in the presence of a parent who's unsafe emotionally, then I just have to make choices about what I'm going to express and not express, and how much distance that I need to set between myself and that unsafe parent. Uh, for instance, if one of the parents is, emoting in such a way that the child feels that they're responsible to comfort them or to do something for them, you can help that child know it's okay for you to go to your room, put on headphones. It's okay to do certain things, so that you're not necessarily carrying the burden of that parent's emotions. But you want to be very careful, like I said, not to polarize with the other parent, so that you're telling the child something negative about the other parent. You're simply saying, if either one of us are doing X, Y, or Z, that's unsafe, and you're not responsible to take care of that. So, what's an appropriate age to teach children healthy boundaries? Annette, I think as soon as they're capable of understanding, help them know things like, this is my job, not your job. This is my thing to take care of, not your thing to take care of. And teaching healthy boundaries doesn't necessarily have to be a teaching moment. It can literally be a description of when a child comes over and tries to comfort their parent. You could say, honey, thank you so much for feeling concerned for me. Just know that I'm going to be okay, and it's not your job to take care of me right now. That may not be a lesson about boundaries, but you've just taught them about boundaries by simply saying, you're not responsible for that, or I'll take care of that and you don't have to worry about that. You're teaching your children about boundaries and, by the way, creating for them emotional safety. Here's the other thing I wanted to say about this. Um, Even if you have created a sense of emotional safety in your home, in today's world, I think it's important to do a fairly regular check in. In other words, they may not be they may not come offer to you what their concerns are. And so if you're not asking, are you doing okay? Tell me how you're feeling these days. How are things going at school? How are things going for you in the travel between your father's house and I, or your mother's house and mine? And just ask the questions that give them the opportunity. Even if they feel safe with you, they may not feel confident to initiate a conversation about something that's painful. And so I think it's on us as the adults to be able to say, listen, I want to invite you to talk to me, and I want to create a sense not only of safety, but also of welcome, that what you're feeling is something I'm always here to listen for. And then I'm going to check in with you regularly. How are you doing? Hey, I know you had a hard time with that kid in school last week. How's that going? How are you feeling about yourself? And then ask even questions like, do you worry? What are some things that you're afraid of? And so all these different things are ways of not only creating a sense of safety, but also inviting your child or the people that you're responsible for. This could even be from an employee to employer to employees. If you create a sense of emotional safety, you want them to know you may not be their comforter, their therapist, or even their parent, but it's still on you as the person in authority to create the emotional atmosphere under any area that you have authority over. So emotional safety, I fear that sometimes people minimize the importance of it. But I want to go back to what I was saying again about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What I started to say is that Polly taught me that uh, when people are trafficked in some way, the traffickers or the pimps who are looking to find victims utilize Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they understand the power of expressing acceptance. And so what they'll do is they'll really utilize that idea that maybe if no one else sees you or loves you or knows you, I want you to know that you can tell me anything, and I'll listen to anything, and I'll express understanding of you. And if a child or a teenager feels accepted by somebody but feels rejected by their parents, they're vulnerable then to the influence of that person. It's kind of a little bit corny, but it's what I call the Little Mermaid um, dynamic, right? Remember the Little Mermaid? She's angry at her father, and the sea witch takes her under her arm and offers her this path to acceptance, right? But the whole thing is she starts out feeling rejected by her father and ultimately then accepted by someone who has evil intent. But the power of acceptance makes somebody much more susceptible to influence. Why? Because they have such a deep need. It's their second need, just above physical safety. The next greatest need is that of acceptance. And so emotional safety is really saying, you are accepted in my presence. What you're thinking, what you're feeling, what's going on with you is accepted in my presence. You can talk to me about anything. It's one of those things that when your children come to you with a very difficult topic, and again, let me remind you, I'm a marriage and family therapist in private practice. And so families come to me with their kids to talk about some incredibly difficult things. And what has often happened is the child comes to the parents with their very difficult information and news, something about them or something they've done or something that they're thinking or something they're feeling. And the parents don't know what to do with it. And in their panic, the kids don't feel safe. And so it sets up kind of this tug of war, this dynamic where the kid's going, I don't feel safe, but the parents going, but I want you to talk to me. And so in counseling, a lot of times, the very first thing that we have to do is help the family find a place where everybody can speak freely and feel at least heard and potentially understood by the other people in the family. Emotional safety is a key because outside of emotional safety, it's very difficult to develop emotional and mental health. It's that sense of safety that says I can speak freely and will be accepted, that allows me then to honestly deal with and process the things that need to be processed for me to maintain health. Moose, sorry. The dogs are hearing a dog outside, and I'm sure you will hear them tell us how important that dog outside is. But so let me say it again. Emotional safety is the capacity that we have to generate the sense that the people around us are free to talk, express themselves, be themselves, and talk to us about anything that might be taking place inside their soul. If we can create and foster that atmosphere of emotional safety, then that also fosters emotional and mental health. And to the degree that we can't or don't foster emotional safety, then what happens is we set up this destructive cycle of whatever they're dealing with goes underground, and the pain of not feeling accepted is added to that. And it becomes kind of this downward spiral of the pain that they're feeling is internalized instead of verbalized, internalized instead of verbalized. And when that happens, then what the pain that they're dealing with increases, and you may never know about it. One place where we don't create emotional safety in today's culture is in just simple discussion about the issues of our day. Now, you probably know what I'm talking about. If you do any social media at all, there's an obvious kind of, if you put something controversial on certain social media platforms, then what will happen is you're going to get anything from someone who wants to have a healthy discussion to someone who's going to shame you, call you names, do everything they can to denigrate your character and not just your thoughts. And so social media as a whole is not a particularly emotionally safe place. And what we find is that people have such strong emotions about the issues of today, everything from the pandemic and the various issues connected to that, to politics and the various issues connected to that, to world events and the various issues connected to that. People have such strong, polarized emotions about that if someone says, "Hey, help me understand blank X, Y, or Z," rather than help me understand, they often get kind of jumped on by a number of different people. And rather than create a sense of emotional safety, almost everybody out there is feeling some sense of, I don't even know if I can talk. Let me talk about another area where I think we as a culture need to work on our emotional safety, and that is, I read a statistic the other day about the number of people that are afraid to speak up about their political beliefs because of the way that they'll be publicly ridiculed and publicly addressed for being honest about their political beliefs. Regardless of what those beliefs are, left, middle, or right, when we begin to live in a culture where people don't even feel safe to speak up about their political beliefs, then we've created a culture, we've fostered a culture that is not going to foster democracy, but rather it's going to foster the rising anger of people who can't express themselves verbally, so they find other ways to express themselves. Emotional safety then really is the context of all emotional and mental health, because in that context, if we can speak freely about things, then we can work through just about anything. To the degree that we don't learn to create, foster, and grow in emotional safety, everything from our young children who are absorbing the pain of our culture today, through people who are trying to talk through and think through very difficult and complex things, through even people who are trying to solve some of the problems of our day, if we don't create a sense of emotional safety, then rational discussion, conversation, and question answering doesn't ever happen. And what we end up with then is anger, accusation, conspiracy thinking, and extremes. Let me say something about that really quick. Depending on your window into those conversations, I think it's important that we learn not to judge the middle of the bell curve by the ends of the bell curve. What I mean by that is, the bell curve, right? The data that says in the middle is where the majority is, the extremes are on either end. But the extremes on either end of the bell curve, there's far fewer of them, but because they're extremes, they get a lot more notice. Whether they get noticed more on social media or whether they get more attention of mainstream media, when they're presented as this is what's going on out there, I don't think that represents the majority of our country. What's taking place at the extremes is exactly that. They're extremes. What we've got to be able to do is we need to stop judging the middle by either end of the bell curve and understand that not every person on the left is represented by what we see and hear by certain extremes, and not every person on the right is represented by what we see and hear at the extremes. In fact, I would submit that I believe the vast majority of people don't fit the extremes. Again, I had posted something on Twitter that said, "Do you really believe they believe what you believe they believe?" And it was a little bit of an attempt to be funny, but even more than that, I was trying to say, be careful to assume about what people believe if you've been listening to or watching the extreme parts of the bell curve and judging the entire left or right based on the extremists. Extremists, by definition, are a smaller percentage of the population. And it's very difficult in today's atmosphere to get a sense of what's really going on in the atmosphere because we see more of the extremes, we hear more of the extremes. Listen, we've got to take a deep breath. We've got to find enough emotional safety internally and in our connection spiritually that we're less and less afraid to be ourselves and speak up for ourselves, even when we might face some pushback. We also need to understand that the people that we're responsible for, whether it's our children or whether we're an employer or a coworker, the people that we're connected to in life, we also can help foster and create emotional safety for them by being someone who's safe to listen to, safe who will listen to them, and make it clear that it's safe that we can listen to them without immediately jumping to conclusions or immediately painting them with the broad brush of the extremists. Emotional safety is something that we've got to return to as a culture. And the difficulty is often what happens is when we see someone else who's unsafe, we want to respond to their unsafeness by trying to quell their, trying to respond to and quell their lack of safety with our own kind of aggressive response to that. And then we end up with this ever escalating kind of sense of the polarities that we talked about in one of the first weeks in this series. Emotional safety starts with your own emotional safety, but then as soon as you feel like you've regulated and can really manage your own emotional world, see who else you can give it to by making sure that you listen well to people, express value to them, even if you disagree with their ideas. Don't jump to conclusions about their character, but rather listen to their ideas and see if it's possible to engage in just a legitimate discussion. Ask questions. Emotional safety as a whole allows us to reduce the intensity of the emotional atmosphere of our culture and helps the kids of our culture know that there are safe adults that they can go to when they're feeling something that may lead them down a very destructive path. Listen, we can't just watch the kids of our culture self-destruct. And we don't win that battle by being angry at the people who've made it unsafe. We win that battle by becoming safe people ourselves and by helping create safety in every single place that we have any authority whatsoever over the atmosphere. Learn to listen, learn to express empathy, learn to even give value to somebody when you disagree with their ideas, but value them as a person. If there are people in your life that you have concerns about, check on them. Sometimes, as people often say, sometimes it's the strong ones that you need to check on because they've been carrying other people's burdens. But especially for those people that you're most connected to, stop from time to time, look them in the eyes, let them know that the question is real, and just ask them, are you okay? And if you're not okay, what do you need? And if what they need is something that you can provide for them or point them to, help connect them to what they need. Asking each other if we're okay, especially those people who are most at risk and most fragile, I think is another way that we can foster and spread this idea of emotional safety. We have to, and by we, I mean we, the people, have to be the ones who say we're no longer willing to create an atmosphere of escalating conflict, but rather we're going to stand for what we stand for, but also care for people in the process. both in our own homes and in our culture. Let's make sure that we work hard to create emotional safety. And we will see you guys next week. And perhaps next week we'll tell you more about our lovely new grandson. And but for now, just know that we love you guys. We're grateful for having you join us. Good to see some of you guys who haven't seen in a while. And we will see a bunch of you guys next week. Some of you will see in about an hour as we continue with our Think Differently training and certification. But the rest of you guys, we'll see you next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Love you guys. Bye.